you ever feel like... Hello, my fellow dwellers of Sanctuary. I hope you are doing very well on this day. I just kinda need to say this. Blizzard, please let us change builds. Please. I know you might be sat there going, what? Of course you can change builds. Just change builds. Put different parts in different places, put different skills on your bars, wear different gear, and you're good. And yes, you can do all that, and yes, then you will be good. But it kind of smooths over and skips past the part where doing all of that is so needlessly time-consuming, complex, resource-intensive, and I think above all of that, not fun. This is a problem that's been consistent for me since the game came out, but it's been really exasperated by the recent balance patch, because, you know, if other moves get buffed, you now want to see if they're worth doing, so you want to swap to them and play around with them. But if that process of playing around with them is too punishing by the game's own design, you're just not going to. And that's a real shame. So I've finally been inspired to properly talk about this. Oh, and if you like the ranged infinite chain freeze explosion ice shard variant that I'm playing in the background, the full guide is up on the channel and I will link it down below for you. Now, I don't want you to get the wrong impression here, so let's dig into what I mean. Let's say I wanted to switch from Meteor Sorcerer that I showed you guys back to Arclash, my main most comfortable build. So you head up to your stash that's likely overflowing with spare legendaries that you can't justify getting rid of because they're good rolls, and what if you need them, and maybe spare rares too with good affix rolls, and what if you need them, even though there's clearly room for many more tabs, and hell, there's even room for 2 more rows that are just apparently just hidden by this panel for some reason. And then you get out your gear for the build that you're swapping to, you equip that gear, and then maybe you need to swap one of your legendary aspects. Maybe you're using the same piece in both builds and you just swap aspects each time. It's wasteful, yes, but it's the best you can do when you don't have a second piece of gear with perfect affixes rolled on it, because both builds have overlapping ideal pieces. So you head to the enchanter, you extract the new one, you imprint it on, that's all well and good. Now you go to the jeweler and you get all of your decorations taken out of your old gear, and then you put them in your new gear, drag them in, and yes, you could have a second set of decorations in all of your gear, but that is a lot to craft up into the royal highest form, and, well, you've been busy doing, you know, things like playing the game. So you've already spent a lot of gold, but at least now you have the correct gear with the correct gems and the correct aspects equipped. So we open up our skill tree and we look at the refund cost and we're like, ha ha, okay, no. So we don't refund all, we just individually take out points that we don't need while leaving the ones that overlap between the builds in, so we can save a bit of gold. That's like a frugal Diablo tip for you. And then we spend the time putting the points where they need to go. And if you're using your own personal build that you're not, well, borrowing from someone else, I sure hope you have remembered exactly where all the points go in what you're now switching to. You might have to sit there for a while and be like, was it that yet? Oh, no, yeah, it was that, which might mean a few points go in the wrong place and have to immediately come back out, which is, you know, more gold, and then it takes more time, and eventually you remember, /copy and crack it, and then we have to move on to the paragon board, where for some reason there isn't a refund all of the paragon board button for, I can't think of a justifiable reason for that, or even why can't you just right click one of the gate nodes and then it undoes for the equivalent cost that entire board, so you don't have to reset your paragon right to the beginning, but you can reset it board by board. So you spend ages individually one-click node by noding, reversing through until you can put on the new board in the new way and start placing points once again. Again, all at a huge cost of gold, which obviously takes a lot of time to farm, and then there we go. God forbid if you need to go all the way back to your base board. Sorcerer, I guess, is lucky in that your first 2 boards will be pretty much the same no matter what build you're doing, because they're that good and universally needed. So you get on your new boards, you get on your new glyphs, and that's all well and good, and now finally, you are in a position where you are in your new build, ready to keep playing. You have swapped, enjoy your new setup. That whole process, if everything is already ready and you know exactly what you're doing with no figuring out, takes like 10 minutes and costs millions of gold. And I want to highlight then at this point that the gold part I'm not actually too bothered by. You know, it should cost to change, it makes it a more weighty decision to change, and it gives you a reason to farm gold, and I quite like just passively farming gold with like a show on my other monitor, and it's quite a therapeutic experience. I mean, that is actually playing the game, killing stuff, doing dungeons, selling gear. There's nothing wrong with that. But that said, it is a lot of gold, and there is a point where it becomes a problem that we'll get into. But the other one is, yes, it's only 10 minutes, but that's 10 minutes that you could clear like 2 nightmare dungeons in. That's 10 minutes of busy clicking work because sort of like basic quality of life UI features are missing. Nobody's there like, God, I'm so glad it's more like hardcore like Diablo 2 where I have to manually click everything hundreds of times to swap build. That's not a plus, that's not a gain, that's not enriching. You don't actually have a good time doing that. The Diablo 3 armory is the perfect example of something that really should have just remained as a standard feature in this game and in games like this in general, because it's not making it easy, it's just making it convenient. It's much more respectful of the player's time to not have them have to both manually undo and redo every single part of their build, but also ask them to remember every individual part of their build if they don't have it in a third-party planner set out for them, and you can't expect everyone to do that. So essentially, the time, resources, and mental load of swapping between builds that you already know are good and have been in is massive, and there's no real justifiable reason for it being so. Yes, the cost is there, but the cost can be baked into a swap builds button. If I could press the become ice shards or become Arclash, and it was like, that'll be 5 million gold, I'd press the button, and then everything's done. It puts on the right gear with the right gems, with the right paragon board, with the right skill tree, and that is just lovely. Alright, the cost really doesn't need to change, it's the application, and again, the pure quality of life. And you might be sat there thinking, okay, but you know, it's very well likely the game's designed intention for you to pick one build that you like, work on it, improve it, and don't really swap. That's what they were going for. And they also don't want you just swapping before you walk into a boss, swapping before you do Helltide, swapping before you do Nightmare Dungeons. Well, on that front, okay, fine, but then it's easy to just restrict auto-build swapping for towns. Just don't let it happen outside of towns. As it is right now, if you really wanted to before walking into a boss in a dungeon, you could just redo your talent tree and paragon board and put on a different set of gear that you're already carrying with you. You can do that manually. Yes, if it just is a button, then that becomes much more tempting, but if that button still costs like 5 million gold and plus, depending on your level of pop, you're still not going to do it. But yeah, sure, restrict it to town, I think that is fine. Honestly, I think it is better. You want your build to handle essentially all content, there's a satisfaction to that. So you make it cost a load of gold, you make it only happen in town, and then it just does the entire process we went over for you, like the armory in Diablo 3. That is easy enough. But that initial point that I touched on, that what if it's the design intention that you pick a build and stick to it, that is where I really take issue. Because this is an ARPG. It's a game with a talent tree and loads of different abilities that all have fun interactions with loads of different legendary aspects and uniques, with loads of different paragon setups and glyphs. There is 1,000 ways to build every character in different combinations, and ignoring numerical balance and some of them being too weak to be viable and yada yada yada. On a pure interest level, there is so many different ways to combine so many different abilities and passives to make fun playstyles. So when you have given someone a box of Lego, asking them to only build one little structure and then making it really hard and difficult and not intended and non-rewarding to try and build anything else feels like a really weird decision and an antithesis to giving them this box of Lego to begin with. The box of Lego, of course, being, you know, the skill tree, the paragon tree, all of the legendaries, the abilities, and how you can fit them all together in a myriad of different interesting ways. A game like this, and RPGs in general, with ability-based, especially ARPGs, are built for experimentation, for buildcraft, for theory, for testing and having fun and seeing if this quirky idea with this particular move and this particular synergy will actually work for you. And that is so deeply enjoyable. Coming up with new playstyles and builds is like my everything. I find it so good. And bottom line, if we're not supposed to be doing that, perhaps outside of once per season, then I think that's an inherent mistake or flaw in of itself. But even beyond that, we now get to the actual point of this entire discussion, which is, it's one thing to swap to a build that you already know about, already have the gear for, already know works, and is in your head and ready to go. It is entirely another thing to swap to a build that is a test, that swaps to a build that is a theory, to swap to a build for the pure experimentation of it. Because if you want to try a build in this game, you have to make sure that you have enough gold, resources, gear, etc. to swap twice. Because if you're going to switch over to something a little bit off the beaten path, that isn't a min-max meta build, that isn't something you're copying from somewhere, well then, once you're in that build, either you like it and it's powerful and you're all good, but if you don't like it or it's just too weak, you now have to swap all the way back to your original build that does work, which is double everything. Which is brutal to think about, and it makes the sheer idea of experimentation really daunting, and it puts you off. And I can understand anyone who's there like, I have my build, it works, it's powerful, there are fun few things I want to try, but it's just not worth it because they probably won't work, and then I've just wasted all of this stuff and time, and, you know, what if the worst happens where you swap to a build, try it, it doesn't work, but now you don't have the gold, or the gear, or etc. to go back to your actual good build? You might call that poor planning, but that is a colossal amount of resources you have to think ahead at, and then you're stuck trapped in a weak build. Or what if you get halfway through your paragon board and run out of gold? I know that that's happened to Cotton a couple times, so now he, instead of farming on the character that he was swapping on, it's now too weak because he needs to go get gold from selling gear and killing stuff to finish the new paragon board, so he's swapped to his other character in order to get gold to then get his main character back to having a proper paragon board. Basically, the amount of foresight, planning, and resources you need to experiment with builds is colossal, to the point where, yeah, I could understand anyone who goes, you know what, it's not worth it. I will let other people do that. If they figure out something good, I will then swap to it, but I am not going to take one of my abilities I think's cool and try and make it work, because if it doesn't work, well, I've absolutely ruined myself. And I think that is a real shame when there is so much cool experimentation that can be done with builds in this game. I really, really do. And again, as I said right at the start, this might be a much bigger problem for me than it is for you, because obviously I want to experiment as much as possible. I changed builds maybe like every couple days. The amount of gold and time, it's just crazy. But I'm happy to do it because I love bringing you guys new build ideas, new ways to have fun on Sorcerer, and it's really, as I said, satisfying to me. But god damn, is it just a lot to actually make happen. The amount of failed builds that you have never seen because they weren't good enough for a video is scary to think about. The untold amount of gold and gear and wasted time. Oh my. But that is, again, by the by. Obviously, most people aren't doing it that often, but I think basically, bottom line, what I'm getting at here is I hope that at some point it becomes much more friendly, not specifically to Switch builds, though I think that's just quality of life that there's no reason not to have, but I want it to be much more friendly to experiment with new builds without it being a disaster if it goes wrong, or you don't have, you know, infinite resources to undo anything that you do. So I hope that's kind of come across in the way that I wanted it to. I hope that makes sense. And I think the irony here is that I really do believe that on the whole, again, numbers and pure balance aside, this game, Blizzard has created a setup on the classes, at least that I have played, that really do encourage and reward you for experimenting with different setups. You can actually make some really cool things happen in some really interesting ways. So it just really hurts that actually doing that is so punishing and difficult by the very nature of the game's own current design. As I said, it really seems to clash to itself, having all of these different abilities and ways to modify and combine them, but then make it really difficult and time-consuming and resource-extensive to actually play around. It just is such an antithesis of itself. In any case then, let me know what your thoughts are on all this. Let me know how you have found trying new builds, swapping and that, or if you are just in the camp, it's not worth it, I'm going to play what's good and I'm happy with that. Or if you're someone that just doesn't care to swap builds and you are just very content with playing whatever is meta, there's nothing wrong with that too, of course not. Play however you find fun. Like if you enjoyed this, subscribe and hit the bell for more, consider supporting the future of the channel on Patreon down below, and until we meet again, a goodbye.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.